Welcome to this feedback video. Well, I'm so happy that we're with many learners from Europe, Afghanistan, Cameroon, Mexico, Peru, Hong Kong to New Zealand even, and even Myanmar. So Mr. Shin, I hope everything is fine with the tough earthquakes that you faced and that you can catch up with the course. If not, please let us know. Um, well, with all these different time zones, it was very difficult to pick a good time for the live webinar. But it will be on Monday, the 12th of May at 7 o'clock Central European Time. Well, if you cannot make it because of the time zone, please let me know if you have some urgent question to discuss, and then we can see what we can do about it. For the rest, please be welcome next week. Keep an eye on the dates tab. There the link will be shared, and the TA teams has all kind of other means to share this link with you. So it is nice to see each other live, introduce yourself to also to the other learners, and then come up with questions and discussions. One practical thing, if there is something that's bothering you about the assignments, the deadlines, that specific questions you have about the platform, about the course, please feel free to email the AGS team. You can email at ags@tudelft.nl. It's better for us to receive your emails than to search for those kind of remarks on the discussion forum. The discussion forum is for content related topics or topics that also are relevant for the other learners. These personal emails you can just send to the TA team. Well, then speaking about the discussion forum, we have been quite a few discussions, and I was involved in a few. I also let some others go to see what you came up with, because the best way of learning is to share your thoughts with each other, share your experiences, and try to help out. Because altogether, you know a lot, way more than I will ever know. So, also based on your experience, it's very nice to see. There are still a few matters that are a bit complex and still gives quite some discussion on the forum. Well, one of the main topics is this readily biodegradable COD, BOD, the more difficult hydrolyzable COD. If you have high COD concentrations or super low COD concentrations, will AGS still be a good option for you? In this feedback video, I will try to shine some light on it, and it is always a little bit complex, and it differs from location to location. I would say if you have a lot of COD, a lot of biodegradable COD, then and high concentrations, do anaerobic digestion if you can. If you still have a nutrient issue afterwards, you can always apply either activated sludge, or if space is limited, you could go for AGS, but then maybe you need to forward some of your precious COD that's then not converted into biogas, but helps to get these granules going. Another remark was made that you could also use then Anamox to treat this reject water. For the people who don't know Anamox, it's a super nice microorganisms, very slow growing, difficult microorganisms, but if you get them working, they are doing a great job in removing the ammonium together with nitrite, so NO2, and then they form the nitrogen gas. They are sensitive for COD, so be careful. There have been papers of Marie Winkler. She made aerobic granular sludge with a COD-N ratio of about 2, where there's a small layer of heterotrophs and then the anamox are inside. But it was delicate and it worked out in the lab. In a full scale, I don't know if it ever worked out. Well, that was a little bit of a sidestep. Now back to the big COD questions for AGS. we work for the AGS with the readily biodegradable COD. So that is like the acetate, the propionate, the glucose. So the easy stuff, the stuff that microorganisms really party on. This is the substrate that phosphate accumulating organisms also like. So the Acinetobacter, they use acetate and propionate, the Tetrasphera, they can also use glucose, but it should all be easily biodegradable COD. Well, if we feed from the bottom of the reactor, the COD concentration in the lowest layer of the reactor is always high because it's a plug flow. So as soon as the influent hits the granules, it is influenced readily biodegradable COD concentration. This is what the phosphate accumulators like, and they will take it up and they release the phosphate. And that is what you see also in the higher layers, because if this readily biodegradable COD is finished, there's always the more, less appetite stuff. So as we might first pick the chocolate and only after that we take the Brussels sprouts, that is what the bacteria do. So they first take the acetate and the glucose and the easy biodegradable stuff. But there's always a substrate that is less biodegradable and first need to be hydrolyzed. That takes, of course, more effort because the organisms have to make enzymes to do so, to cell externally break down this more difficult biodegradable substrate and transform it into the easy stuff that they can take up over their cell membrane. What we have seen in the AGS reactors is that these granules are specialized. So the big, very dense granules always end up in the bottom of the settled bed, or most of the time, and they are specialized with a lot of these phosphate accumulators. So they take up all these easy biodegradable substrate. And then in the regions above that, we see granules that are a little bit smaller in size, but they have a lot of hydrolysis capacity. So they produce these hydrolytic enzymes. In those regions, these more difficult biodegradable substrates are hydrolyzed and still can be taken up by phosphate accumulating organisms as long as it's the redox potential is very low, so as long as it's anaerobic. This substrate is not finished after this anaerobic phase. That is like what we see in activated sludge. We have an anaerobic selector tank in activated sludge, and there you have these hydrolysis processes also in the flocks. The difference with the flocculant sludge is that a lot of the suspended solids and colloids are entrapped within the floc, and this hydrolysis will continue during the aeration phase, and this flocks breaks and coagulates again. So sometimes this more difficult biodegradable material is on the outside of the floc, sometimes it's on the inside, so sometimes the substrate is used aerobically, sometimes anoxically, depending on where at that specific moment this material ends up. The AGS are rigid, so it's the granule. But also on the granule, on the surface of the granule, you can have accumulation of particulate substrate, of colloids, so they can be entrapped in the surface of the granule. Now, there, of course, also in the aerobic phase, the hydrolysis continues, so you might get some growth of heterotrophs on the outside of the granule. Maybe some PAO keep doing their job because also aerobically they can still take up the acetate. So that's a super complex degradation and conversion and uptake of this more difficult biodegradable substrate that is happening during the aerobic and anoxic phase. Then by now you've also seen the videos of the selection spill, so you have realized now that there's always flocculant sludge also accompanying the granules. But these suspended solids, they also are entrapped in the flocs, But the nice thing there is that they're washed out every cycle or every other cycle. So their SRT, their solid retention time of these flocks, is super low. That is also why we see in this flocculant sludge that if we put that anaerobically, that we still get a lot of biogas production, because these more difficult biodegradable substrates are in these flocks and didn't have time to be fully hydrolyzed. So this flocculant sludge is rather unstable, as we call it. It's still very active. If we take it out and put it aside anaerobically, a lot of biogas will be and can be produced, which is a nice thing, of course, if you can use the biogas. So yeah, it is this substrate. It is a complex mechanism, and we have to realize that there's two different substrates: the readily biodegradable substrates that are nice for the phosphate accumulators, and the more difficult stuff that is hydrolyzed and converted throughout the whole process. Well, then of course the question pops up: what if we have just suspended solids, just suspended biodegradable COD, so or BOD? What happens then with the granules? Well, that's what I tested a long time ago, and there's a nice paper about it. My frustrating experiments with starch, where these granules grew out to very fluffy balls. They looked like little stuffed bats. They were very beautiful and soft, but they grew big and they were clogging like everything. They still settled very well, so it was not really a problem, and they still did the job. But that was because this starch was their only substrate, and the hydrolysis during this anaerobic phase was too slow to be really all converted, and then a lot of hydrolysis and biodegradation happened during the aerobic phase, and then this filament started to grow out. On the other hand, we also have granules that have filamentous organisms, but they're still very smooth. So these filaments grow inside the granule in very little fragments. So it doesn't really matter if they're there, but they will grow out like crazy as soon as the circumstances are like it. Usually in AGS systems, in practice, this does not happen. So that about instability of granules, they're super stable. So yeah, there are different substrates. Sometimes you have high concentrations and all is fine. If you have super low concentrations, your granules might, you can still form granules, but they will be less dense, and maybe you get zooglea in it. So if your concentrations are really low, and I would say your readily biodegradable substrate is below something like 13 milligrams per liter, then you will start facing some troubles. Then you can also look at a pre-fermentation tank. So to make sure that your more difficult biodegradable substrate is already pre-fermented and your acetate concentration is higher when you dose it to your AGS system. You could also ferment your selection spill, and then you will have the same effect. So there are all kind of solutions. Maybe with this feedback video, I leave you a little bit with with even more question marks. But I hope it became a bit more clear how these complex but super beautiful granules work. Well, if you have still questions, see you in the webinar, and maybe during another feedback video. This is it for now. Bye.